Welcome to Your Mythology Book Club. I'm Daniel, and I'm a Greek mythology enthusiast. In this series, we're exploring the Iliad, and in this episode, we'll cover Book 23. We're getting down to the wire here, rapidly approaching the end of the Iliad and its 24 books. Let's recap what happened in Book 22 before we plunge ahead into 23. 22 was the last of the battle books, but really it was a duel between just two men, Hector and Achilles. Hector had found himself outside the walls of Troy, alone, with all the other Trojans safe, for the moment, within the city walls. Hector was out there by himself because he felt he needed to be the one to face Achilles, or because he felt he couldn't face the other Trojans after their army had been devastated due to his poor decision to keep them camped in the field the night before. That mistake, leaving them on the field overnight, had left the Trojans vulnerable to the single-handed slaughter Achilles had wrought upon them during his Aristeia of Book 21. So, whether for honor's sake or due to embarrassment, Hector found himself alone on the field against Achilles. The noble men and women of Troy watched him from the wall above, and his parents publicly pleaded with him not to face Achilles alone, to not die, as Hector was the main defender of Troy. But Hector ignored them. Fate was pushing him towards this confrontation. Achilles, meanwhile, was more than ready for this fight. This was the opportunity Achilles had been waiting for, the chance to face the killer of his beloved Patroclus. Zeus had sent Athene to assist Achilles. His golden scales indicated that it was Hector's time to die, and Apollo withdrew his support for Hector. I don't really think that Achilles ultimately would have needed Athene's support, but in the moment it was certainly helpful. Hector was running away from Achilles as fast as he could, Achilles right on his heels, pun intended, and the runners had gone round and round the city multiple times with no end in sight to the chase scene. Athene put a stop to this madcap pursuit with a ruse to convince Hector to stop and face Achilles. And Athene's trick was simply this. Athene appeared to Hector as his own brother Deiphobos. So touched Hector was that his brother had come out from within the walls to stand by him, that Hector didn't think to question his sudden appearance. Hector then so counted on his brother to help him, that when they faced Achilles together, and Hector's first spear cast had gone awry, he turned to Deiphobos to ask for a second spear. And in seeing that his brother had disappeared, Hector knew the truth, knew that he'd been betrayed by the gods to his death. Hector still made a valiant attempt, however. Having seen Achilles cast his own spear and miss, Hector believed Achilles was now limited to his close-range weapon, a sword. With this in mind, Hector struck out against Achilles in an epic, violent assault that should have been effective. But in addition to having tricked Hector with an apparition of his brother, Athene had also invisibly returned Achilles' own miscast spear to him, allowing Achilles to strike Hector from an unexpected distance. And since Hector was wearing Achilles' old armor, stolen off the corpse of Patroclus, Achilles knew just where to strike. Book 22 could have ended here with the death of Hector. It would have been a fine, dramatic moment to pause upon. But that would not have sated Achilles' lust for revenge. So Book 22 continued as Achilles bound dead Hector's feet to his chariot and dragged his body around the city, the Trojans on the walls above watching in horror. This was a humiliating public mockery of Hector's recent fleeing from Achilles, an ironic and insulting reenactment of that shameful moment of the greatest Trojan hero's final moments. Book 22 finally ended with the reactions of his parents and of his wife, all of whom are inconsolable, but his father, King Priam in particular, will not rest until his son can have a proper funeral. But how can the Trojans hold a proper funeral for Hector with his body in the possession of Achilles, determined to continue desecrating his enemy's corpse. This is where Book 23 opens. In the Greek camp, Achilles now in possession of the remains of two men. Patroclus, whom he now plans to honor with an elaborate funeral, and Hector, whom he plans to feed to the dogs, just as Hector had planned for Patroclus. We now join Achilles and his Myrmidons as they re-enter the Greek camp after the defeat of Hector. The rest of the Greeks go to their various parts of the camp. Only the Myrmidons Achilles suffered not to be scattered, but spake among his comrades whose delight was in war. Fleet-horsed Myrmidons, my trusty comrades, let us not yet unyoke our whole-hoofed steeds from their cars, but with horses and chariots let us go near and mourn Patroclus, for such is the honor of the dead. Then, when we have our fill of grievous wailing, we will unyoke the horses and all sup here, he said. And they with one accord made lamentation, and Achilles led their mourning. So thrice around the dead they drave their well-maned steeds, moaning, and Thetis stirred among them desire of wailing. Bedewed were the sands with tears, bedewed the warriors' arms, so great a lord of fear they sorrowed for. And Peleus' son led their loud wail, laying his man-slaying hands on his comrade's breast. All hail, Patroclus, even in the house of Hades, for all that I promised thee before I am accomplishing, seeing I have dragged hither Hector to give raw unto the dogs to devour, and 12 noble children of the Trojans to slaughter before thy pyre, because of mine anger at thy slaying. Hector has announced to the spirit of Patroclus that he's now fulfilling everything that he promised. He's killed and dragged Hector's body, and he's brought 12 Trojan men here to sacrifice. But he hasn't actually fulfilled his promises yet. Not really. The body of Patroclus remains unfed to the dogs. The 12 Trojan men remain unsacrificed. And the body of Patroclus remains uncremated. It's actually this last part that's the very most important. Uncremated or unburied, Patroclus' spirit cannot rest. The promise that Achilles made to Patroclus' spirit back in Book 18 was, I will not hold thy funeral till I have brought hither the armor and the head of Hector, thy high-hearted slayer, and before thy pyre I will cut the throats of 12 noble sons of the men of Troy, for mine anger that thou art slain. That was his promise. The Myrmidons now prepare the funeral, and for the ancients, this means the ritual slaughter of numerous oxen and sheep and goats and boars. Wine is spilled upon the ground for the gods and the dead, and this wine mingles in the sand with the spilled blood of the many sacrifices. All this while the body of Hector lays unceremoniously upon the ground nearby, filthy, stepped over and around by those preparing the funeral. By rights, he should be having this same ceremony prepared for him, but he's not. He's a helpless bystander to the rites which will allow Patroclus to enter the underworld, while Hector's spirit remains uneasy and present here in the world of the living. There's no reason for Achilles to delay further, yet delay he does. He's allowing the Myrmidons to proceed with the ritual preparations, but he's not letting them actually hold the funeral today. Something just won't let Achilles say goodbye just yet. He's done everything he promised to Patroclus, everything except the funeral. But Achilles is hanging on to Patroclus. His mind and his heart are torn because the funeral is the final goodbye. It's what allows the spirit to move on to the next world and leave Achilles in this world. At the request of Agamemnon, Achilles now joins the other Greek leaders reluctantly, or at least Achilles comes across as reluctant to join them, with his heart torn on whether to proceed with the funeral. Maybe it's just a distraction for him. An excuse to procrastinate is attractive to him right now. He does decide to join them. He responds to the summons, and no one would have blamed him if he'd insisted on holding the funeral right now. But he's delaying, appearing before the other Greek leaders. They want Achilles to wash first. He's still covered with the gore of his lengthy battles, and it's inappropriate for him to join them in this filthy, unclean state. But Achilles refuses to wash, saying, Nay, verily by Zeus, who is highest and best of the gods, not lawful is it that water should come nigh my head, or ever I shall have laid Patroclus on the fire, and heaped a barrow, and shaved my hair, since never again shall second grief thus reach my heart, while I remain among the living. Yet now for the present let us yield to our mournful meal, but with the morning, O king of men, Agamemnon, rouse the folk to bring wood and furnish all that it beseemeth a dead man to have when he goeth beneath the misty gloom, to the end that untiring fire may burn him quickly from sight, and the hosts betake them to their work. Achilles is delaying, putting off the funeral of Patroclus until tomorrow. Why? The rest of the Greeks don't argue. They don't ask him why wait. They know his grief is overwhelming, and they simply agree to assist Achilles with the funeral of Patroclus in the morning. Achilles needs their help to collect enough firewood. He's going to have a massive funeral pyre for Patroclus. Now, the rest of the Greek leaders disperse to their various parts of camp to make their dinners, and then sleep for the night. But not Achilles. He can't rest, not with the grief in his heart. He joins the Myrmidons again, and they all go down to the sea to grieve together. And what follows is one of the most eerie scenes in all of the Iliad. I'm not even sure if we're to take it at face value, as events that literally happen, or if it's all meant to be a dream. Of all the vague scenes in the Iliad, of all the passages throughout the Iliad that you can interpret multiple ways, this one is among the vaguest, and you can read into it whatever you bring to it. We'll talk more about the vagueness and multiplicity of interpretations possible throughout the Iliad at the end of this episode. For now, I'll read this entire passage and let you decide which interpretation you prefer. But the son of Peleus upon the beach of the sounding sea lay groaning heavily amid the host of Myrmidons in an open place where waves were breaking on the shore. Now when sleep took hold on him, easing the cares of his heart, deep sleep that fell about him, for sore tired were his glorious knees with onset upon Hector toward windy Ilios. Then came there unto him the spirit of hapless Patroclus, in all things like his living self, in stature and fair eyes and voice, and the raiment of his body was the same. And he stood above Achilles' head, and spake to him, Thou sleepest, and hast forgotten me, O Achilles. Not in my life hast thou been unmindful of me, but in my death. Bury me with all speed, that I pass the gates of Hades. Far off the spirits banish me, the phantoms of men outworn, nor suffer me to mingle with them beyond the river, but vainly I wander along the wide-gated dwelling of Hades. Now give me, I pray pitifully of thee, thy hand, for nevermore again shall I come back from Hades, when ye have given me my due of fire. Never among the living shall we sit apart from our dear comrades, and take counsel together. But me hath the harsh fate swallowed up, which was appointed me even from my birth. Yea, and thou too thyself, Achilles, peer of gods, beneath the wall of the noble Trojans art doomed to die. Yet one thing will I say, and charge thee, if haply thou wilt have regard thereto. Lay not my bones apart from thine, Achilles, but together, even as we were nurtured in your house, when Menoetios brought me yet a little one from Apoeis to your country by reason of a grievous manslaying, on the day when I slew Amphidamas' son, not willing it, in childish wrath over the dice. Then took me the knight Peleus into his house, and reared me kindly, and named me thy squire. So therefore let one coffer hide our bones, a golden coffer, two-handled, thy lady mother's gift. Then made answer unto him Achilles fleet of foot, Wherefore, O my brother, hast thou come hither, and chargest me everything that I should do? Verily, I will accomplish all, and have regard unto thy bidding. But stand more nigh me. For one moment let us throw our arms around each other, and take our fill of dolorous lament. He spake, and reached forth with his hands, but clasped him not, for like a vapor the spirit was gone beneath the earth with a faint shriek. And Achilles sprang up marveling, and smote his hands together, and spake a word of woe. Ay me, there remaineth then, even in the house of Hades, a spirit and phantom of the dead, albeit the life be not anyways therein. For all night long hath the spirit of hapless Patroclus stood over me, wailing and making moan, and charged me everything that I should do, and wondrous like his living self it seemed. The spirit of Patroclus has appeared to Achilles. That's the face value reading of this beautiful scene. And that final moment when Achilles reaches out to embrace Patroclus, only to find there's nothing there. It's simply heartbreaking. No matter how we choose to interpret this scene, Achilles is convinced that he really did see Patroclus. This is evident from his final statement, expressing wonder at the truth of the persistence of a spirit after death. And it's so much like us in modern times to question our beliefs and to yearn for certainty about the afterlife. While Achilles previously held doubt, apparently, about the eternal nature of humanity, he doubts no more. But now we come to our own question. How do we choose to interpret this scene? Was it really the ghost of Patroclus, come from Hades to admonish Achilles for delaying his funeral? Or was it Achilles' own heart finally giving him permission to say goodbye, to hold the funeral that will separate them forever and delay no longer? Some might object to a literal interpretation of this scene by pointing to another ghost scene within Homer, the scene in the Odyssey in which Odysseus speaks with the spirits of several dead persons. Those who do point to that scene and insist that a literal Homeric ghost must be offered blood before it can speak coherently, something that Odysseus does in the Odyssey, but which Achilles has not done here. Author John Heath, in his paper titled Blood for the Dead, Homeric Ghosts Speak Up, says that because Patroclus is not yet buried, this requirement for blood does not yet apply to Patroclus. Patroclus can speak, according to Heath. Heath says that Patroclus is in between worlds while he remains unburied or uncremated. This argument is bolstered by Patroclus' own words to Achilles. The spirits banish me, the phantoms of men outworn, nor suffer me to mingle them beyond the river. But vainly I wander along the wide-gated dwelling of Hades. The river, of course, is the Styx, and the ghost of Patroclus wants his funeral. Or if there is no ghost, and this is all a dream, Achilles' own heart is now ready to hold the funeral. This is a magnificent piece of artwork, the Iliad, to have moments like these, pure humanity, still vibrant after millennia. And the scene holds up whether you choose to interpret the ghost of Patroclus literally or not. Now, it's dawn now, and the other Greek leaders are fulfilling their own promise now. Their promise to assist Achilles with the funeral of Patroclus. Agamemnon rouses the men, and Meriones leads an expedition to the woody slopes of Mount Ida with men and mules and axes, and they return with a great amount of cut firewood, and they'll need it. A proper funeral for a hero involves not only burning the hero himself, but all the sacrificed animals, and in this case, the sacrificed men. There's going to be a lot of burning today. Meeting the other Greeks returning with the firewood, Achilles and the Myrmidons now don their armor and mount their chariots. But this isn't for battle, it's for formality, like a modern military honor guard in their formal dress uniforms to honor their dead comrade Patroclus. Then, straightway, Achilles bade the warlike Myrmidons gird on their arms and each yoke the horses to his chariot. And they arose and put their armor on and mounted their chariots, both fighting men and charioteers. In front were the men in chariots, and a cloud of footmen followed after, numberless. And in the midst his comrades bare Patroclus. And they heaped all the corpse with their hair that they cut off, and threw thereon. And behind did goodly Achilles bear the head, sorrowing, for a noble comrade was he speeding forth unto the realm of Hades. And when they came to the place where Achilles had bidden them, they set down the dead, and piled for him abundant wood. Then fleet-footed noble Achilles bethought him of one thing more, Standing apart from the pyre, he shore off a golden lock, the lock whose growth he nursed, to offer unto the river Spercheios. And sore troubled spake he, looking forth over the wine-dark sea. Spercheios, in otherwise vowed my father Peleus unto thee, that I, returning thither to my native land, should shear my hair for thee, and offer a holy hecatomb, and 50 rams should sacrifice there above thy springs, where is thy sacred close and altar burning spice. So vowed the old man, but thou hast not accomplished him his desire. And now, since I return not to my dear native land, unto the hero Patroclus I may give this hair to take away. Knowing that he will never return home to fulfill another promise he'd made, he'd promised to the god of the river Spercheios in his homeland that he would sacrifice this lock of hair upon his safe return, which will never happen now. Achilles instead cuts off that long lock of hair and places it into Patroclus's hands. Achilles then asks Agamemnon to disperse the common Greek soldiers, leaving only himself, the Myrmidons, and the Greek leaders such as Agamemnon to complete the funeral. Those remaining now construct the funeral pyre. It's described as a square 100 feet to a side, without its height being mentioned. The body of Patroclus is placed on the top of this enormous pile of firewood. They now prepare the animals they've previously killed, flaying them in the traditional way. Achilles himself takes the fat from the animals and wraps Patroclus in it. Gruesome, but the purpose is to speed his burning with the oily fat. Wrapping with the fat is also a part of the traditional sacrificing ritual, commonly attributed to Prometheus, who did the same act himself. It's a universal part of the ancient Greek religion. He then puts the flayed animal bodies around Patroclus. Next, jars of oil and honey are added. Oil will also speed the burning. Honey, not so much, but it's also valuable. And by adding things of value, they're honoring the dead. Remember that loot equals honor in their world. Now we start adding more sacrificed animals. 4 horses Achilles heaves up onto the pile, and 9 dogs. And now we've come to the human sacrifice, and Achilles is no longer hesitating. With his sword, Achilles personally slays all 12 captive Trojan men, regarding which Homer says Achilles devised mischief in his heart, which I'd say is an understatement. Adding these men to the pile, Achilles now wants to claim that he's fulfilled his promise to Patroclus and announces, "All hail to thee, O Patroclus, even in the house of Hades, for all that I promised thee before am I now accomplishing. 12 valiant sons of great-hearted Trojans, behold these all in company, with thee the fire devoureth. But Hector, son of Priam, will I nowise give to the fire to feed upon, but to dogs." But we're still not there yet. There's 2 problems. No dogs are dishonorably eating Hector's body right now, and no fire is honorably cremating Patroclus's body. Regarding the dogs, the narrator says, "No dogs might deal with Hector, for day and night Aphrodite, daughter of Zeus, kept off the dogs, and anointed him with rose-sweet oil ambrosial, that Achilles might not tear him when he dragged him. And over him Phoebus Apollo brought a dark cloud from heaven to earth, and covered all that place whereon the dead man lay, lest meanwhile the sun's strength shrivel his flesh round about his sinews and limbs." Thus we learn that the gods Aphrodite and Apollo are protecting the body of Hector from decay, even as Achilles has continued to drag Hector's body about with his chariot at times. Hector's body has not spoiled. He doesn't seem dead. Dogs don't want to eat him, and the gods are keeping the dogs away anyway. A cloud sent by Apollo is literally hovering over Hector, specifically to keep the sun from speeding his decay. Regarding the fire, which is the honorable end planned for Patroclus, Achilles finds he has a problem. This gigantic funeral pyre just won't light. So Achilles has a plan, which worked pretty well for him back at the beginning of the Iliad. He plans to pray. Then, fleet-footed noble Achilles had a further thought. Standing aside from the pyre, he prayed to the two winds of north and west, and promised them fair offerings, and pouring large libations from a golden cup, besought them to come, that the corpses might blaze up speedily in the fire, and the wood make haste to be enkindled. Then Iris, when she heard his prayer, went swiftly with the message to the winds. They, within the house of the gusty west wind, were feasting all together at meat, when Iris sped thither, and halted on the threshold of stone. And when they saw her with their eyes, they sprang up, and called to her every one to sit by him. But she refused to sit, and spake her word. No seat for me. I must go back to the streams of ocean, to the Ethiopians' land, where they sacrifice hecatombs to the immortal gods, that I too may feast at their rites. But Achilles is praying the north wind and the loud west to come, and promising them fair offerings, that ye may make the pyre be kindled whereon lieth Patroclus, for whom all the Achaeans are making moan. She having thus said departed, and they arose with a mighty sound, rolling the clouds before them, and swiftly they came blowing over the sea, and the wave rose beneath their shrill blast, and they came to deep-soiled Troy, and fell upon the pile, and loudly roared the mighty fire. So all night drave they the flame of the pyre together, blowing shrill, and all night fleet Achilles, holding a two-handled cup, drew wine from a golden bowl, and poured it forth, and drenched the earth, calling upon the spirit of hapless Patroclus. As a father waileth when he burneth the bones of his son, new married, whose death is woe to his hapless parents, so wailed Achilles as he burnt the bones of his comrade, going heavily round the burning pile with many moans. The prayer works, and throughout the night the north and west winds, whose names are so poetic, Boreas and Zephyr, the winds blew unceasingly, causing the great funeral pile of Patroclus to rage, while Achilles kept circling the fire, moaning and crying, and pouring wine into the earth for the spirit of Patroclus. Now, I get the impression that it wasn't necessarily normal to tend a funeral pyre like this all night, but at this point, it's very clear that Achilles is going all out on this funeral. Finally, with the coming of the morning star to herald the approaching dawn, the winds departed and the fire died down. And with the funeral now finally accomplished, Achilles allowed himself to sleep. However, he didn't get to sleep long, because a gathering of men show up, and the noise of their approach wakes him up. It's not really clear who these men are. I went through 4 different translations, and in 3 of the 4, it seems that it's Agamemnon and a group of men with him that approach at this point, and it's the clatter of their arrival that wakes poor Achilles up. So I'm going with the interpretation that this group consists of Agamemnon and some other undefined list of Greek leaders. None of the interpretations are really all that clear at this point, so I suspect that the original Greek is itself unclear on who's actually arrived in addition to Agamemnon. The fact that they show up early is what makes me think it wasn't expected that Achilles would have been up all night tending to the fire, but that's me reading a lot into a somewhat unclear scene. Anyway, having been woken up, Achilles says to Agamemnon and whatever other guys are with him, "Son of Atreus, and ye other chiefs of the Achaeans, first quench with gleaming wine all the burning, so far as the fire's strength has reached. And then let us gather up the bones of Patroclus, Menoetios' son, singling them well, and easy are they to discern, for he lay in the middle of the pyre, while the rest apart at the edge burnt confusedly, horses and men. And his bones let us put within a golden urn, and double-folded fat, until that I myself be hidden in Hades. But no huge barrow I bid you toil to raise, a seemly one, no more. Then afterward do ye Achaeans build it broad and high, whosoever of you after I am gone may be left in the benched ships." Achilles has given them instructions to build a tomb, a barrow or burial mound, for Patroclus and himself, which he will himself be placed in following his own death later. It will be a shared tomb. He wants to stay with his beloved for all time. This is in the very mound which was a major landmark and tourist draw throughout antiquity, or rather, the disputed and much discussed multiple mounds in the area of Troy, which have variously been identified as the tomb of Achilles and or Patroclus over the centuries. To this day, you can spot mounds in the area on satellite view identified as the tomb of Achilles. And if you really want to start looking into it, and I have spent so much time reading various papers and just scouring maps of that whole region of Turkey looking for mounds, a good place for you to start is a paper by Jonathan Burgess titled Tumuli of Achilles, which I'll link to in the show notes. Burgess makes the argument that there were numerous sites in antiquity identified as the tomb of Achilles. The purpose of some of these sites were religious, as later Greeks regarded Achilles as a hero, which was a specific category of worshipped ancestors. The purpose of other sites was political, since claiming to have the tomb of this tremendously important cultural figure in your city was valuable. So there really never has been a single uncontested site for the tomb of Achilles, similar to the multiple famous birthplaces of Zeus, which are still touted on Crete. Interestingly, while here in the Iliad, Achilles is really emphasizing that he wants to be buried in the same mound as Patroclus, later Greeks, Alexander the Great among them, had no problem with later developments, again both religious and political, that saw separate burial mounds of Achilles and of Patroclus identified, which Alexander and his comrade Hephaestion each visited in an act that was itself political and certainly designed to illustrate the image they wanted to portray of themselves fulfilling these same roles, fulfilling the roles of the Achilles and Patroclus of their era to the Greeks of that time. The convergence of mythology and history has always been complex in this part of the world. The Greeks now do as Achilles asks. They douse the embers with wine and gather up the bones of Patroclus. And these they do place into a golden urn. And there's a legend about this urn. It was an amphora, a tall, narrow jar with two handles that was given to Achilles by his divine mother Thetis. These amphorae were often used in the ancient world to transport liquids such as wine or oil, although the more common ones were made of pottery and not, of course, of gold. This gold amphora had been given to Thetis by Dionysus, a gift to her in thanks for a favor Thetis had done for him. Thetis does a lot of favors for a lot of gods. And you'll remember that it was repayment for a favor that Thetis did for Zeus that allowed her son Achilles to act out his anger to such an extent that Patroclus is now dead. Remember that whole praying to let the Greeks suffer in battle without me thing? Now, the favor Thetis did for Dionysus was to rescue him when he was chased into the sea by Lycurgus. And this is a rich vein of mythology, Lycurgus, and it's taking all of my strength to resist going into it now, because it's only so very tangentially related to what's happening now in book 23. But you should look into him. Look into Lycurgus. You'll find panthers and madness and man-eating horses and him mistaking his son for a tree and pruning his son to death. Oh, it's just the craziest stuff. But anyway, okay, let's get back to the burial mound of Patroclus for now. The Greeks heap earth up over the site, the start of the mound that they would later add more to. But for now, that golden urn with Patroclus's bones is kept in the hut, presumably Achilles' hut, for his own bones to be added to once he dies. And then that urn will be placed into the mound for them to be together for eternity. So in a way, Achilles still, even now, hasn't really said goodbye, since he's still got Patroclus there with him. But at least Patroclus' spirit is no longer uneasy wandering the earth. He is at rest now. And now The Greeks think it's all over. The funeral rites for Patroclus are over, right? I think the same thing. But Achilles has another idea, and this is where book 23 takes a really wide and unexpected turn. So for the moment, Achilles has all the Greeks just sit there while he goes to his ships to get a few things. Hey, wait a minute here, guys. I've got an idea. I'll be right back. And they're probably not sure what the plan is, just like we aren't, while they're sitting there beside this new burial mound. Soon enough, Achilles returns and announces to the Greeks that they're going to hold funeral games for Patroclus, and he's come back with all the things that he's going to give away as prizes to competitors in the games. Yes, games at a funeral, and more specifically, athletic competitions. Now, this wasn't as weird to the ancient Greeks as it would be to us. More of Achilles just wanting to maybe delay saying goodbye, but also wanting to do everything, every single thing he can possibly think of to honor Patroclus. And I want to pause here and talk for a minute about this transition we're going through in book 23 from the actual funeral of Patroclus to the funeral games, because the tone of this book really changes here. And unless we address and really identify the underlying continuity, that continuity could be lost in the details of the games and its winners and losers. The point I'm going to make through explaining the importance of athletic competitions to the Greeks is that book 23 is a continuous whole. The games flow naturally from the funeral once you understand the cultural context. So it's not such a wide left turn after all. Athletic competitions were very important to the ancient Greeks from a cultural and more specifically from a religious perspective. And we do get our modern Olympics from that tradition. But the Olympics were only one of several such festivals regularly held throughout antiquity. And unlike our modern Olympics, to the ancients, these had powerful religious connotations. In fact, these games were so thoroughly associated with the ancient Greek religion that they were a target for elimination by the Christians, and it was the early Christian emperors who saw to it that all of these competitions were wiped out, quite literally made illegal, along with all other forms of ancient religious practice, not to be resumed until the 1600s sporadically and regularly in the form we know them in only in 1896. Now, some of these festivals consisted of both athletic and artistic competitions. So you'd go to see who was the fastest runner, but also who was judged to be the best dancer or musician. In ancient times, there were actually 4 main recurrent competitive festivals which were pan-Hellenic, meaning open to all Greeks, and only one of them was quote-unquote Olympics. Besides the Olympic Games held at Olympia, there were the Isthmian Games in Corinth, the Nemean Games in Nemea, and the Pythian Games held at Delphi. And the site at Delphi is actually a site I've been to. The stadium is still there. It's an honest-to-goodness athletic stadium with seating in this magnificent location, high in the mountains, higher up the mountain from the Temple of Apollo there. And one final really important fact about the ancient games. 2 of the 4 major Pan-Hellenic festivals, the Nemean and the Isthmian, had specifically been founded as funeral games. Thus, let's keep in mind as we make this transition from the explicitly funeral portion of book 23 over to the coming up funeral games portion of the book, that 23 is still all about honoring the life of Patroclus and Achilles wanting to do every last thing he can to honor his beloved before he finally does say goodbye. For the first competition, it's a chariot race. This is a good one, probably the best one, honestly. Certainly the one that stands out to me. I have very vivid images each time I read the Iliad of this particular scene. And the prizes. Achilles is really generous with the prizes here. I'll read them out. First, for fleet chariot racers, he ordained a noble prize, a woman skilled in fair handiwork for the winner to lead home, and an eared tripod that held 22 measures. These for the first man. And for the second he ordained a 6-year-old mare unbroke, with a mule foal in her womb. And for the third he gave a goodly cauldron yet untouched by fire, holding 4 measures, bright as when first made. And for the fourth he ordained 2 talents of gold. And for the fifth a 2-handled urn untouched of fire. 2 notes here. First, with all these competitions, we can draw some inferences as to the relative value of different things and people by what's being given in first place and second place and so on. And that brings me to my second note, which is that I guess it's good that the woman is the most valuable prize since she's being given to the first place winner. I'm not even sure how to address this. Really? Maybe I'll say, come on, man, Achilles. After having almost caused the Greeks to lose the war and to definitely have lost Patroclus over another owned woman, I'd have hoped for a little more growth here. But no, I suppose that's not really fair. They're all trapped within their culture. Achilles as a nobleman, not literally as trapped as this captive woman is, but metaphorically, none of them can see from our perspective. Culture changed at a glacial pace in the past, so it's unlikely for someone of these ancient times to actually experience cultural change the way that those of us living today have. Conquest and replacement of one culture with another would be the only change they could conceive of. Certainly not changes in mores and attitudes like we experience now. And they identified so very strongly with their own cultures to an extent that is hard for us to understand now. So I can't put this on him. I can't blame Achilles for not being better in this way as much as I want him to be better. This doesn't excuse the wrong. This just acknowledges that it's a global wrong in his culture. The growth that we are seeing in Achilles is there, but it's just not going to be towards alignment with the morality that we've achieved with the millennia that we have on him. So let's look at some of the other relative value of prizes here. A pregnant horse is worth more than a cauldron. That's interesting. Okay, I can buy that. Fourth place is 2 talents of gold. How much is a talent? Gold is valuable. I'm having trouble imagining any cauldron is worth more than gold. Let's see. Okay, so reading up, it seems that the unit called a talent in Homer is generally thought of as a small amount, like the size of a coin, maybe. Which is confusing because that same word talent, when it is used in English translations of classical Greek literature and also in the Bible, that a talent in those instances references a large amount of gold for those other time periods and cultures. So anyway, confusing, but okay, a cauldron is worth more than a couple coins. I can see that. And then the fifth prize is a 2-handled urn. So that makes me think it's an amphora, like we saw being used for Patroclus's bones earlier. But in all likelihood, this is a standard pottery amphora and certainly not a gold one. I'll also point out here that we'll soon see there will be only as many competitors in each contest as there are prizes. So everyone gets something. Old folks nowadays complaining that young people all grew up getting participation trophies obviously haven't read the classics, huh? We've got participation trophies in the foundational piece of Western literature right here. Achilles now announces that he's not going to participate in the chariot race, but that he would totally win if he were to participate. But not going to, because the horses are sad about Patroclus. It sounds like a lame excuse, but these are the immortal horses, Xanthos and Balios, who we've met before, And these very intelligent and aware horses probably actually are very sad at the loss of Patroclus. So Achilles announces, "Son of Atreus and ye other well-grieved Achaeans, for the chariot racers of these prizes lie awaiting them in the lists. If in some other's honor we Achaeans were now holding our games, it would be I who should win the first prize and bear it to my hut. For ye know how far my pair of horses are first in excellence, for they are immortal, and Poseidon gave them to my father Peleus, and he again to me. But verily I will abide. I and my whole hooved horses, so glorious a charioteer they have lost, and one so kind, who on their manes full often poured smooth oil, when he had washed them in clear water. For him they stand and mourn, and their manes are trailing on the ground, and there stand they with sorrow at their hearts. But ye others throughout the host, get ye to your places, whosoever of the Achaeans hath trust in his horses and firm-jointed car." So now the competitors in the chariot race come forward along with their horses already yoked to chariots. Here we've got Eumelos, not someone we've come across before. He was the king of Pherae, a city in Thessaly in northern Greece. Second is Diomedes, and it's specified that his horses were stolen from Aeneas, whose father Anchises had stolen their ancestors from Tros, the legendary figure for whom Troy was named and who received his horses as a gift from Zeus. So we should expect Diomedes to have a big advantage with his stolen magic horses. Third is Menelaus, and his two horses are named and given little backstories. One is named Aethe and is being borrowed from his brother Agamemnon, and the other is his own horse, Podargos. Aethe is a female horse, Podargos a male, and these facts come into play once the race gets underway. It's also noted that Aethe was given to Agamemnon by a Greek leader back in Greece in order to buy his son's way out of the war. It's a little confusing here because the Greek who gave Aethe to Agamemnon is named Anchises, the same name as Aeneas' father, who we just mentioned in relation to Diomedes' horses. And of course, Anchises is the name of a very famous Trojan, the father of the very famous Trojan Aeneas. However, this Anchises we're talking about here is Anchises of Sicyon, a city on the Corinthian Gulf in Greece, so he's a Greek, and this city was apparently famous for the quality of its horses. Okay, so straightening that out. The fourth competitor in the race is Antilochus, my favorite, the young and enthusiastic son of old Nestor. Antilochus is just so eager to prove that he's worthy to stand among these older, proven heroes. And he's got his father right there, Nestor, who's older than anyone, blessed with this incredible long life, too old now to still participate, but he'd been a real hero back in his day, and he still wishes he could participate in things like this. We'll see Nestor pop up a few times throughout the games. So Antilochus is just so kind and patient when, predictably, his father can't resist giving him some advice. A lot of advice. Here's what Nestor tells his son on the art of chariot racing. Antilochus, verily, albeit thou art young, Zeus and Poseidon have loved thee and taught thee all skill with horses. Wheretofore to teach thee is no great need, for thou well knowest how to wheel round the post. Yet are thy horses very slow in the race. Therefore, methinks there will be sad work for thee. For the horses of the others are fleeter. Yet the men know not more cunning than thou hast. So come, dear son, store thy mind with all manner of cunning, that the prize escape thee not. By cunning is a woodman far better than by force. By cunning doth a helmsman on the wine-dark deep steer his swift ship, buffeted by winds. By cunning hath charioteer the better of charioteer. For whoso trusting in his horses and car alone wheeleth heedlessly and wide at either end, his horses swerve on the course, and he keepeth them not in hand. But whoso is of crafty mind, though he drive worse horses, he, ever keeping his eye upon the post, turneth closely by it, neither is unaware how far at first to force his horses by the ox-hide reins, but holdeth them safe in hand, and watcheth the leader in the race. Now will I tell thee a certain sign, and it shall not escape thee. A fathom's height above the ground standeth a withered stump. Whether of oak or pine, it decayeth not in the rain. And two white stones on either side thereof are fixed at the joining of the track, and all round it is smooth driving ground. Whether it be a monument of some man dead long ago, or have been made their goal in the race by ancient men, this now is the mark fixed by fleet-footed goodly Achilles. Wherefore do thou drive close, and bear thy horses and chariot hard thereon, and lean thy body on the well-knit car slightly to their left, and call upon the off-horse with voice and lash, and give him rein from thy hand. But let the near horse hug the post, so that the nave of the well-wrought wheel seem to graze it. Yet beware of touching the stone, lest thou wound the horses and break the chariot. So would that be triumph to the rest and reproach unto thyself. But, dear son, be wise and on thy guard, for if at the turning post thou drive past the rest, there is none shall overtake thee from behind or pass thee by, not though he drave the goodly Arion in pursuit, the fleet horse of Adrastos, of divine descent, or the horses of Laomedon, best of all bred in this land. Okay, there's one more competitor. It's Meriones, the faithful companion of Idomeneus, the king of Crete. We get no backstory or description of him other than that his horses are sleek-coated steeds. Okay, I'm not really a horse guy, so that doesn't mean much to me. Now the men mount their chariots, and Achilles shakes lots. I'm imagining maybe bits of pottery with markings like the first letter of each of their names written on them, and these are all placed in a helmet. Achilles shakes the helmet until the lots start to fly out, indicating their starting positions. The track is a there and back route, a loop, so having the inside track will be a big advantage. First up is Antilochus, then Eumelos, followed by Menelaos, Meriones, and Diomedes with his magic horses last. Achilles points out to them the turning post, off in the distance, the point around which they're to circle, then return. And he puts Old Man Phoenix out there to judge their turning around it correctly. We haven't seen Phoenix for a while. He doesn't get out much, so this is good for him. The race starts. The horses charge ahead, wheels and hooves churning up dust, manes flowing in the wind. Bounding across the plain, they all quickly reach the turning point and begin their return back toward the finish line near the sea. And this is where the race starts to get really interesting. In first place, as they're all racing toward the finish line, is Eumelos, with Diomedes so close behind that it seems to Eumelos that Diomedes' horses are about to climb up into his chariot with him. And now it really starts to look like Diomedes is about to pull around Eumelos and take the victory. But as we've seen in battles, so we'll see in sports. The gods have their favorites and intervene to make things happen. In this case, it's Apollo who wants Eumelos to win. Eumelos' horses had been bred by Apollo, and the god wants to see his horses win. So Apollo knocks the lash from Diomedes' hands. But Athene sees all this happening and is there instantly, putting the lash back into Diomedes' hand and breaking Eumelos' yoke, causing his horses to run off the road. Eumelos is thrown out of the chariot. His race is over. But the race continues for the rest of them as they're galloping towards the finish line. Diomedes is now in the lead, with Menelaus following, Antilochus next, and presumably Meriones back there somewhere. He's so far behind, the narrator doesn't mention him once between the start and end of the race. At this point, for young Antilochus, with victory over Menelaus at least still possible, even if he can't possibly catch Diomedes, Antilochus now says to his horses, "Go ye two in, strain to your fleetest pace. Truly I nowise bid you strive with those, the horses of wise Tydides, unto which Athene hath now given speed, and shed glory on their charioteer. But overtake Atreides' horses with all haste, and be not outstripped by them, lest Aethe, that is but a mare, pour scorn on you. Why are you outstripped, brave steeds? Thus will I tell you, and verily it shall be brought to pass. Ye will find no tendance with Nestor, shepherd of hosts, but straightway he will slay you with the edge of the sword, if through heedlessness we win but the worse prize. Have after them at your utmost speed, and I for my part will devise a plan to pass them in the straight part of the course, and this shall not fail me. Hey, male horses, you're about to get beat by Menelaus' female horse. My father Nestor is going to have you killed unless you beat Menelaus." That's his argument right there. To his horses. Well, it works. Antilochus' horses pick up the pace, and close the gap with Menelaus. And now Antilochus sees a narrow spot of the track coming up, where the road runs into a deep gully with gushing water running through it. Antilochus has a plan. He passes Menelaus here by leaving the track. He's no longer driving in the gully where the smooth road is. He's chosen to race up along the edge of the gully, dangerously clattering across broken ground, Antilochus high above Menelaus as he's passing. Not a good thing for a chariot. They had pretty limited terrain they were good on. This maneuver is not only dangerous to Antilochus, but to Menelaus as well. If Antilochus' horses trip up or his chariot wheel slips, it could all come tumbling down onto Menelaus and his chariot. As he's being passed, Menelaus calls up to Antilochus. Antilochus, thou art driving recklessly. Hold in thy horses. The road is straitened. Soon thou mayest pass me in a wider place, lest thou foul my chariot and undo us both. But Antilochus drave even fiercelier than before, plying his lash, as though he heard him not, as far as is the range of a disc, swung from the shoulder when a young man hurleth it, making a trial of his force. Even so far they ran on. Then the mares of Atreus' son gave back, for he ceased of himself to urge them on, lest the whole hooved steeds should encounter on the track and overset the well-knit cars, and the drivers fall in the dust in their zeal for victory. So upbraiding Antilochus spake golden-haired Menelaus. Antilochus, no mortal man is more malicious than thou. Go thy mad way, since falsely have we Achaeans called thee wise. Yet even so thou shalt not bear off the prize unchallenged to an oath. Thus saying, he called aloud to his horses, Hold ye not back, nor stand still with sorrow at heart. Their feet and knees will grow weary before yours, for they both lack youth. Thus spake he, and they, fearing the voice of the prince, sped faster on, and were quickly close upon the others. Now the Argives, sitting in concourse, were gazing at the horses, and they came flying amid their dust over the plain. And the first aware of them was Idomeneus, chief of the Cretans, for he was sitting outside the concourse in the highest place of view. And when he heard the voice of one that shouted, though afar off, he knew it, and he was aware of a horse showing plainly in the front, a chestnut all the rest of him, but in the forehead marked with a white star round like the moon. And he stood upright and spoke among the Argives. Friends, chiefs, and counselors of the Argives, is it I alone who see the horses, or do ye also? A new pair seem to me now to be in front, and a new charioteer appeareth. The mares which led in the outward course must have been thrown out there in the plain. For I saw them turning first to the hither post, but now can see them nowhere, though my eyes are gazing everywhere along the Trojan plain. Did the reins escape the charioteer so that he could not drive aright round the post and failed in the turn? There, methinks, must he have been cast forth, and have broken his chariot, and the mares must have left the course in the wildness of their heart. But stand up ye two and look, for myself I discern not clearly. But the first man seemeth to me one of Aetolian race, and he ruleth among the Argives, the son of horse-taming Tydeus, stalwart Diomedes. Then fleet Aias Oileus' son rebuked him in unseemly sort. Idomeneus, why pratest thou untimely, while yet far off the high-stepping mares are coursing over the wide plain? Neither art thou so far the youngest among the Argives, nor do thy eyes look so far the keenliest from thy head. Yet continually pratest thou. It beseemeth thee not to be a prater, for there are here better men. And the mares leading are they that led before, Eumelus' mares, and he standeth and holdeth the reins within the car. Then wrathfully in answer spake the chief of the Cretans, Aias, master of railing, ill-counselled, in all else art thou behind other Argives, for thy mind is unfriendly. Come, then, let us wager a tripod or cauldron, and make Agamemnon Atreus' son our umpire, which mares are leading, that thou mayest pay and learn. Thus said he, and straightway fleet Aias Oileus' son arose angrily to answer with harsh words, and strife between the twain would have gone further, had not Achilles himself stood up and spake a word. No longer answer each other with harsh words, Aias and Idomeneus, ill words, for it beseemeth not. Surely you are displeased with any other who should do thus. Sit ye in the concourse, and keep your eyes upon the horses. Soon they in zeal for victory will come hither, and then shall ye know each of you the Argives' horses which follow and which lead. And so the racers came to the finish line, Diomedes in first, with Antilochus second. But Menelaus had been gaining on Antilochus, and if the race had been much longer, then Menelaus would have regained the lead over his young rival and come in second. Meriones came through next. His horses were the slowest, but at least he crossed the finish line as a charioteer. Last was Eumelus, defeated by Athene, dragging his own chariot and driving the horses to walk ahead of him. And Achilles took pity on Eumelus in this sad state and said, Last driveth his whole-hoofed horses the best man of them all. But come, let us give him a prize, as is seemly, prize for the second place, but the first let the son of Tydeus take. The Greeks applauded Achilles' generosity at the idea of giving the second prize, a mare, to Eumelus, but Antilochus, indignant at not getting recognition and the prize he earned for his second place finish, spoke up, O Achilles, I shall be sore angered with thee if thou accomplish this word, for thou art minded to take away my prize, because thou thinkest of how his chariot and fleet steeds miscarried, and himself withal, good man though he be. Nay, it behoved him to pray to the immortals, then would he not have come in last of all in the race. But if thou pitiest him, and he be dear to thy heart, there is much gold in thy hut, bronze is there, and sheep, handmaids are there, and whole-hoofed horses. Thereof take thou, and give unto him afterward even a richer prize, or even now at once, that the Achaeans may applaud thee. But the mare I will not yield, for her let what man will essay the battle at my hands. The older men smile, approving of this young man speaking up for himself. This was a much appreciated personal trait in their culture, at least among the noblemen, and they liked to see this young man following in their ways. Achilles answers Antilochus, Antilochus, if thou wouldst have me give Eumelus some other thing beside from out of my house, that also will I do. I will give unto him a breastplate that I took from Asteropios of bronze, whereon a casting of bright tin is overlaid, and of great worth will it be to him. He said, and bade his dear comrade Automedon bring it from the hut, and he went and brought it. Then he placed it in Eumelus' hands, and he received it gladly. This should settle the matter. Achilles has given some random other thing to Eumelus, a piece of bronze armor. Except that not everyone is happy with Antilochus right now, and specifically not Menelaus. He sure isn't happy with the kid. Menelaus feels pretty ripped off at the dirty trick Antilochus pulled to snatch second place out from under him. That dangerous riding outside the course, which could have ended really badly for both of them. And Menelaus lets his feelings be known. Antilochus, who once wert wise, what thing is this thou hast done? Thou hast shamed my skill and made my horses fail, trusting thine own in front that are far worse. Come now, ye chiefs and counselors of the Argives, give judgment between us both, and favor neither, lest some one of the mail-clad Achaeans say at any time, by constraining Antilochus through false words, hath Menelaus gone off with the mare, for his horses were far worse. Howbeit he hath advantage in rank and power. Nay, I myself will bring the issue about, and I deem that none other of the Danaans shall reproach me, for the trial shall be just. Antilochus, fosterling of Zeus, come thou hither, and, as it is ordained, stand up before thy horses and chariot, and take in thy hands the pliant lash wherewith thou dravest erst, and touching thy horses, swear by the enfolder and shaker of the earth, that not willfully didst thou hinder my chariot by guile. Menelaus wants Antilochus to swear by Poseidon, god of horses, not just of the sea, that he hadn't pulled that trick intentionally. Antilochus, however, sees that he's about to lose a lot more of value than just a horse. He's about to lose the friendship and respect of Menelaus, one of the very most important of the Greeks, the king of Sparta and beloved brother of High King Agamemnon. So Antilochus shows his surprising wisdom for one so young, and his response changes the tone of the conversation immediately. Bear with me now, for far younger am I than thou, King Menelaus, and thou art before me and my better. Thou knowest how a young man's transgressions come about, for his mind is hastier and his counsel shallow. So let thy heart suffer me, and I will of myself give to thee the mare I have taken. Yea, if thou shouldst ask some other greater thing for my house, were I fain to give it thee straightway, rather than fall for ever from my place in thy heart, O fosterling of Zeus, and become a sinner among the gods. Thus spake great-hearted Nestor's son, and brought the mare, and put her in the hand of Menelaus. And his heart was gladdened, as when the dew cometh upon the ears of ripening harvest corn, what time the fields are bristling. So gladdened was thy soul, Menelaus, within thy heart. And he spake unto Antilochus and uttered winged words. Antilochus, now will I of myself put away mine anger against thee, since nowise formerly wert thou flighty or light-minded, howbeit now thy reason was overcome of youthfulness. Another time be loth to outwit better men. Not easily should another of the Achaeans have persuaded me, but thou hast suffered and toiled greatly, and thy brave father and brother, for my sake. Therefore will I hearken to thy prayer, and I will even give unto thee the mare, though she is mine, that these also may know that my heart was never overweening or implacable. Wise move, Antilochus. And what I really like about this interaction is that it shows him as both a young and impulsive man, but also as one growing in wisdom and truly his father's son. I'd have loved to have seen more stories about Antilochus. The fifth prize hasn't been given out yet, that pottery amphora. As this was unclaimed with Eumelos getting that random piece of bronze armor instead, Achilles now offers the fifth prize amphora to Nestor out of respect. Everyone knows this old man's competitive spirit is undimmed, even though his body will no longer allow him to participate. So, despite knowing that this generous act will spark a long Nestorian speech, Achilles says, Lo now for thee too, old man, be this a treasure, a memorial of Patroclus' burying, for no more shalt thou behold him among the Argives. Now give I thee this prize unwon, for not in boxing shalt thou strive, nor wrestle, nor enter on the javelin match, nor race with thy feet, for grim old age already weigheth on thee. Thus saying, he placed it in his hand, and Nestor received it gladly, and spake unto him winged words. Aye, truly all this, my son, thou hast meetly said, for no longer are my limbs, friend, firm, nor my feet, nor do my arms at all swing lightly from my shoulders either side. Would that my youth were such and my force so firm as when the Epeans were bearing Lord Amarnykes at Buprasium, and his sons held the king's funeral games. Then was no man found like me, neither of the Epeans nor of the Pylians themselves, or the great-hearted Aetolians. In boxing I overcame Clytomedes, son of Enops, and in wrestling Anchios of Pleuron, who stood up against me, and in the foot race I outran Iphiclos, a right good man, and with the spear outthrew Phyleus and Polydoros. Only in the chariot race the two sons of Actor beat me by crowding their horses in front of me, jealous for victory, because the chief prizes were left at home. Now they were twins. One ever held the reins he ever held, the other called on the horses with the lash. Thus was I once, but now let younger men join in such feats. I must bend to grievous age. But then I was of mark among heroes. But come, hold funeral for thy comrades too with games. This gift do I accept with gladness, and my heart rejoiceth that thou rememberest ever my friendship to thee, nor forget I thee, and the honor wherewith it is meet I be honored among the Achaeans. And may the gods for this grant thee due grace. This really is a sweet moment. Achilles giving Nestor a gift in an athletic competition simply because he knows that Nestor's heart wanted to compete even if his body couldn't. This is a new Achilles we're seeing develop in Book 23. He is no longer the military commander Achilles that we so briefly saw coming out after the defeat of Hector. In that one speech in which he started to rally the troops to march onto the city, before Achilles, you remember, he stopped himself midway and he remembered, no, I need to go back and hold the funeral for Patroclus. But he's even less the moody, angry, prideful Achilles that we've been seeing throughout the Iliad when we've seen him at all, brooding on his hurt. This is a different Achilles coming out, one who's accomplished what he set out to do in life, and he's wrapping up the loose ends. He's generous, thoughtful, and I think even capable of surprising himself as he discovers what's really important to him and what's just not. War and glory, he's finding, aren't as important to him as he'd thought. He was blessed with this incredible talent for war, and for most of his younger life, he let that define him. But along the way, he discovered that he was really about love, love for his comrades, love for this garrulous old Nestor, and love especially for Patroclus. Achilles is not going to come right out and say, I was wrong, war is bad. But I very much believe that this is the emotional trajectory Achilles is on, which we will see come to its full fruition in Book 24. If you follow up reading the Iliad with its immediate sequel, not the Odyssey, but the next book in the epic cycle timeline, the Aethiopus, you'll see this emotional growth that Achilles has undergone in the Iliad gets completely negated. It gets forgotten about. Achilles goes back to fighting and falling in love with someone else, and he moves on like none of what we've been going through with him in the Iliad ever even happened. Now, the Aethiopus isn't still in existence, but the same timeline events are covered by a still existing book called the Post-Homerica by a Greek writer of the Roman period, Quintus Smyrnaeus, or you might find it, as I did on Project Gutenberg, under the title The Fall of Troy. And it's there right now, English translation. Certainly, you could check it out. I read it, but it left me feeling empty, honestly, like the follow-up to the Odyssey did, the Telegony, which is also lost, but it's had a modern reconstruction that you could also check out. In both the Iliad and the Odyssey, we have emotional growth. We have these powerful and complete story arcs, which are undone by the unnecessary sequels whose only motivation seems to have been to see what happened next from a purely factual basis, not thinking about the humanity of the characters. The Post-Homerica and the Telegony had certainly more drama, more events, more everything, but nothing, not as much human, not as much, totally ignoring the human side of the characters in favor of war and drama and surprising turns of events. And again, they left me feeling hollow. So certainly read the Post-Homerica and read the reconstructed Telegony if you're a completionist, like I suppose I am, or if you're curious. I'm not saying don't read them. I'm just saying don't go into them expecting the same depth that we're seeing in the Iliad, and as we will see in the Odyssey in a future series. These two poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey, out of the entire 8 of the epic cycle, these two alone, I believe, survived antiquity for a reason. They were definitely the strongest. People made the most copies of them, and so we were most likely to have anything left now for a reason. They were definitely the strongest. And that's not to say that I won't someday go on to cover what exists of the rest of the epic cycle, these reconstructions and so forth. But the Odyssey is, that's my next goal as we're approaching the end of the Iliad. And there are a number of other surviving works from antiquity outside of the epic cycle, which are, to be honest, higher on my radar than either the Post-Homerica or the Telegony. So let's resume now the games, Book 23, with Achilles and the Greeks. Next up in their boxing match, Achilles stands up to offer prizes to entice combatants. Sons of Atreus, and ye other well-grieved Achaeans, for these rewards we summon 2 men of the best to lift up their hands to box amain. He to whom Apollo shall grant endurance to the end, and all the Achaeans acknowledge it, let him take the sturdy mule, and return with her to his hut, and the loser shall take with him the 2-handled cup. So the 2 prizes Achilles brings out to entice combatants into the boxing match are a mule for first place and a 2-handled cup for the loser. And who steps up to fight? Here's a Greek named Epeius stepping forward. Let one come nigh to bear off the 2-handled cup. The mule, I say, none other of the Achaeans shall take for victory with his fists, for I claim to be the best man here. Suffice it not that I fall short of you in battle? Not possible is it that in all arts a man be skilled. Thus proclaim I, and it shall be accomplished. I will utterly bruise mine adversary's flesh and break his bones. So let his friends abide together here to bear him forth when vanquished by my hands. Appius is all about winning that mule. But to be fair, he's got some reason to be confident. Now, we haven't heard about him yet. This is literally the first mention of his name in the Iliad, book 23. Wow. What is his story? He hasn't been important yet, but he will become very important later, after the events of the Iliad, during events covered by the lost future episodes of the epic cycle. Here's Appius' story. His father was Panopeus, for whom the city of Panopeus was named. And I've mentioned this before. It's a strange place, important in early Greek mythology as the location where Prometheus got the clay from to make humans out of. Panopeus the man, not the city, the man, was a hero of the earlier generation, and he had participated in some of the great conflicts of his time, including the famous Caledonian boar hunt. But it was during another conflict, a war led by one Amphitryon, that Panopeus had sworn by the gods that he wouldn't accept any loot. But you know these guys, they love their loot. So of course he did a little looting, and his punishment for breaking his oath was that his son, this Appius here, who by the way is a giant, this guy is huge. The punishment is that his son would just not be warlike, not be aggressive at all in the way that was expected of men in his time. So Appius, he sees this boxing match as his chance to get some glory that he's been denied all this time. Hey, I'm not comfortable about going into battle, but maybe in the defined, limited sport of boxing, I can step up and show what I'm worth. And maybe it will turn out that way. Maybe he will get some glory by boxing. But what Appius and doesn't know yet, and none of them know yet, is that his real chance for glory is still to come. He will later become the guy who will build the famous Trojan horse. And that will be his real claim to fame. And centuries later, in the city he goes on to found in Italy, Metapontum, the citizens in later times would still be proudly displaying the tools he used to build that horse. And in fact, to this day, thousands of years later, when we think of the Trojan War, we think of the huge wooden horse that Appius built, even if we don't remember his name. Something about him lives on. Anyway, that's Appius, wanting to box and win himself a mule. Up against this gentle giant steps Euryalus, another guy we haven't heard much of yet, but he has come up here and there throughout the Iliad. He was mentioned in the catalog of ships in book 2, and we saw him fighting in book 6, so he's not a complete unknown to us. Along with Diomedes, Euryalus is one of the famous Epigoni, the sons of those men known as the Seven against Thebes. The seven, their fathers, failed in their attempt to take Thebes, but the Epigoni succeeded. So, like Diomedes, Euryalus entered the Trojan War already a famous hero. Diomedes gears his friend Euryalus up for the boxing match. It seems as if they wrap leather straps around their fists in lieu of the large boxing gloves we think of nowadays. Once the boxing match starts, it does not last long. Here, I'll read the whole thing to you. Then was there terrible grinding of teeth, and sweat flowed from all their limbs. And noble Appius came on, and as the other spied for an opening, smote him on the cheek, nor could he much more stand, for his fair limbs failed straightway under him. And as when beneath the north wind's ripple a fish leapeth on a tangled covered beach, and then the black wave hideth it, so leaped up Euryalus at that blow. But great-hearted Appius took him in his hands and set him upright, and his dear comrades stood around him, and led him through the ring with trailing feet, spitting out clotted blood, drooping his head awry, and they set him down in his swoon among them, and themselves went forth and fetched the two-handled cup. That's it. One blow. Appius wins pretty quickly and convincingly, and in a classy move helps stand his opponent back up on his feet again. Truly a gentle giant. Next up, the wrestling match. The prizes: for first place, a tripod stated to be worth 12 oxen. For second place, a woman, skilled, quote unquote, in manifold work, and said to be worth 4 oxen. I cannot imagine being hauled out, first off, as a prize, much less as a second prize, standing next to a thing that you're valued 1/3 of. The market economy has always been a gross, petty, grubby thing, hasn't it? Whether it's slavery in ancient times or sweatshops overseas now. I wonder personally if we will ever reach the sci-fi goal of a post-scarcity world where everyone is free to pursue their dreams and passions, or if our political and economic leaders would, or heck, maybe already are, just intentionally steering us away from it to maintain their own greedy selves, and we'll never know how close we could have come to utopia. I mean, who knows? The more you read classics and ancient literature, the more you see universals about humanity, and it's not always flattering about us as a species. Looting, looting, looting. We sure have always loved looting. Who steps up to claim the tripod or to be burdened with this woman of manifold skills? It's Aias the Greater versus Odysseus for the wrestling match. You know I'm always going to root for Odysseus. I've got nothing against Aias. He is the greater, after all. But Odysseus, the man of many wiles, who was never at a loss, or as Rouse says in his translation of the Odyssey, the castaway, with only his knowledge of man and his ready wit. You know I want to see that guy win. But here's the thing. Aias is a giant. Remember when Achilles wanted to get back into battle, but his armor had been taken by Hector, and he was thinking, who else has armor that would even fit huge old me? Only Telamonian Aias, this Aias, Aias the Greater, came to mind. But since Aias was already in battle, and there simply wasn't any armor left anywhere big enough for Achilles. So this means that Aias and Achilles are the two largest Greeks, at least of ones going into battle. Let's set aside Epeius. Okay, meanwhile, Odysseus over here, oftentimes described as shorter than most, but broad shoulders. And looking a little older. Oh, and he's only really impressive once he starts speaking and you hear his smooth voice and convincing reason. Heck, a number of times in the Odyssey, Athene has to magic him up just to make him look good so people don't disregard him. And keep in mind that a giant just won the last contest. So for Odysseus to win, it will take some doing. Here's how the match goes. And the twain, being girt, went into the midst of the ring, and clasped each the other in his arms with stalwart hands, like gable rafters of a lofty house, which some famed craftsman joineth, that he may baffle the wind's force. And their backs creaked, gripped firmly under their vigorous hands, and sweat ran down in streams, and frequent wheels along their ribs and shoulders sprang up, red with blood, while ever they strove amain for victory to win the wrought tripod. Neither could Odysseus trip Aias and bear him to the ground, nor Aias him, for Odysseus' strength withheld him. But when they began to irk the well-grieved Achaeans, then said to Odysseus great Aias, Telamon's son, Heaven-sprung son of Laertes, Odysseus of many wiles, or lift thou me, or I will thee, and the issue shall be with Zeus. Having thus said, he lifted him, but Odysseus was not unmindful of his craft. He smote deftly behind the hollow of Aias' knee, and loosed his limbs, and threw him down backward, and Odysseus fell upon his chest, and the folk gazed and marveled. Then in his turn, much enduring noble Odysseus tried to lift, and moved him a little from the ground, but lifted him not. So he crooked his knee with the others, and both fell on the ground nigh to each other, and were soiled with dust. And now, starting up again a third time, would they have wrestled, had not Achilles himself arisen and held them back. No longer press each the other, nor wear you out with pain. Victory is with both. Take equal prizes and depart, that other Achaeans may contend. It's a tie. Odysseus manages a tie in a wrestling match against Aias. Not bad. As an Odysseus fan, I will take it. Next up, Achilles comes up with more prizes and another competition. It will be a foot race, and the prizes are as follows. For first place, a silver mixing bowl made in the Phoenician city of Sidon, and Achilles got it as ransom when he captured Priam's son Lycaon. It's not said how many oxen this silver mixing bowl is worth. Second prize is an ox, worth 1 ox. And third prize is half a talent of gold, presumably worth less than 1 ox. The 3 men who step forward to compete in the foot race are Oilean Aias, aka Aias the Lesser, Odysseus, apparently not at all winded after the wrestling match, and finally Nestor's son Antilochos. Oilean Aias is generally held to be the second fastest runner among the Greeks after Achilles himself. So again, Odysseus is setting himself up against someone he shouldn't expect to beat. Antilochos was probably just really excited to participate again. The race is brief and ends in a comedic moment. It's actually one of my favorite little passages for just how colorful it is and how the characters are all just so clear and endearing. Here's how it all goes down in the text. Right eager was the running from the start, but Oileus' son forthwith shot to the front, and close behind him came noble Odysseus, as close as is a weaving rod to a fair-girdled woman's breast when she pulleth it deftly with her hands, drawing the spool along the warp, and holdeth the rod nigh her breast. So close ran Odysseus behind Aias, and trod in his footsteps, or ever the dust had settled there. And on his head fell the breath of noble Odysseus as he ran ever lightly on, and all the Achaeans applauded his struggle for the victory, and called on him as he labored hard. But when they were running the last part of the course, forthwith Odysseus prayed in his soul to bright-eyed Athene, "Hearken, goddess, come thou, a good helper of my feet." Thus prayed he, and Pallas Athene hearkened to him, and made his limbs feel light, both feet and hands. But when they were now nigh, darting on the prize, then Aias slipped as he ran, for Athene marred his race, where filth was strewn from the slaughter of loud bellowing oxen that fleet Achilles slew in honor of Patroclus. And Aias' mouth and nostrils were filled with the filth of oxen. So much enduring noble Odysseus, as he came in first, took up the mixing bowl, and famous Aias took the ox. And he stood holding in his hands the horn of the ox of the field, sputtering away the filth, and spake among the Argives, "Out on it! It was the goddess who marred my running, she who from of old, like a mother, standeth by Odysseus' side and helpeth him." So Oilean Aias slipped and fell in ox filth after Odysseus prayed to Athene, and he's complaining about it while covered in filth. The Greeks are all just laughing at him. If this was a sitcom, you could imagine a close-up of his dirty face and the laugh track going nuts and some wah-wah music playing. There have been so many great moments with the characters we've come to know and love throughout the Iliad, but the games here, in my mind, they're really something special. This whole section is an unexpected bonus send-off for so many of them. The games gives us these heartwarming, low-stakes moments like these in a way we never would have gotten if Achilles hadn't insisted on holding them. I love that we have this. I don't think you'd ever get this now in a modern TV series with 8 episodes that all have to be jam-packed with consequential, OMG, the world is about to end drama. This is 1990s Star Trek, where the characters are just hanging out in the holodeck, pretending to be Sherlock Holmes and Watson for an entire episode. Totally no stakes, and we get to just be with the characters because we love them. And look, comes another moment in the foot race before we even move on to the next competition. Young Antilochos gets to show off his precocious self one more time. Then Antilochos, smiling, bore off the last prize, and spake his word among the Argives. "Friends, ye will all bear me witness when I say that even herein also the immortals favor elder men. For Aias is a little older than I, but Odysseus of an earlier generation, an earlier race of men. A green old age is his, they say, and hard were it for any Achaean to rival him in speed, save only Achilles." Thus spake he, and gave honor to the fleet son of Peleus. And Achilles answered him and said, "Antilochos, not unheeded shall thy praise be given. A half talent of gold I will give thee over and above," he said, and set it in his hands. And Antilochos received it gladly. Kid just doubled his prize just by being himself, complimenting Odysseus and Achilles. I love it. You can also see Achilles just tousling his hair at this moment and calling him a scamp. as he hands over that extra piece of gold to Antilochos. If I had a time machine, there's a lot I'd do. Serious stuff like avert wars, of course, but also inspiring some ancient writer to give us more Antilochos would have to make the time machine to-do list, wouldn't it? What's the next contest? Achilles brings forward a spear and a shield and a helmet and lays these on the ground and announces, "To win these arms, we bid 2 warriors of the best put on their armor and take flesh-cleaving bronze to make trial of each other before the host, whether of the 2 shall first reach the other's fair flesh and touch the inward parts through armor and dark blood. To him will I give this silver-studded sword, a goodly Thracian sword that I took from Asteropios. And these arms let both bear away to hold in common, and a fair feast we will set before them in the huts." Damn, this is getting serious. Combat to first blood is the next contest. And the 2 who step forward are no slouches, so we should be ready for anything. We should expect this to get real gruesome real quick. It's Aias the Greater versus Diomedes. So when on either side the assembly they had armed them, they met together in the midst, eager for battle, with terrible gaze, and wonder fell on all the Achaeans. But when they were now nigh an onset with each other, thrice they came on, and thrice drew nigh to smite. Then Aias smote on the round shield, but pierced not the flesh, for the breastplate within kept off the spear. But the son of Tydeus over his great shield kept ever aiming at the neck with the point of his bright spear. Then fearing for Aias, the Achaeans bade them cease, and each take equal prize. But to Tydeus' son the hero gave the great sword, bringing it with its scabbard and well-cut belt. So the combat to first blood did get too serious too quick, with Diomedes getting really close to Aias' neck with the spear. Not all fun and games anymore. They stopped the fight before there was any blood and divided up the prizes. Next up, Achilles dumps a huge lump of unwrought iron onto the ground and says, "Rise, ye who will essay this match. The winner of this, even though his rich fields be very far remote, will have it for use 5 rolling years, for his shepherd or plowman will not want of iron or have to go into the town, but this will give it them." So the contest here is just to see who could fling this big lump of iron the farthest. This is kind of like the Highland Games. I remember seeing a very similar contest in Inverness, where a fella heaved a huge stone and apparently set a new huge stone heaving record. The prize is the lump of iron itself, one of the handful of references to iron in this Bronze Age story. We get 4 men to step forward for this iron lump flinging, with only one really big name among them: Polypoetes, Leontius, Aias the Greater, and Epeius. This is the first we've seen of Polypoetes or Leontius since Book 12, when these 2 together were defending the gate in the Greek defenses against the attack of the Trojan Asios, who had disobeyed the order to leave their horses behind and attack the defenses on foot. And Epeius, I'm pretty sure this is the same gentle giant we just saw winning the boxing match, although I'm finding the literature frustratingly vague on this point as I try to confirm it. Let's imagine that it's the same guy for lack of an obvious alternative. He was huge, and so this contest should be right up his alley. So first up is this Epeius, the gentle giant again. He flings the iron, and it must not go far because the Greeks all just laugh. See, this is why I'm not 100% certain it's the same guy as before, since that Epeius was a giant, but maybe it's funny because a huge guy only manages a weak throw? I don't know. These last few contests are only roughly sketched out compared to the great level of detail in the text in the first few. Anyway, next up is Leontius, whose throw gets no mention, so it just must have been sort of okay. Third is Aias, whose throw goes beyond the first 2, as we would expect. And finally, it's Polypoetes, and he's clearly the winner because his throw goes as far as a herdsman flingeth his staff, when it flieth whirling through herds of kine. And while I never imagined a shepherd throwing his staff, much less throwing it often enough that it would be a common unit of measure, Polypoetes is now the proud owner of a lump of iron. Another contest, This time it's archery, and an overly complex and poorly thought out archery contest at that. I'll try to describe the scene to you. It starts off sounding somewhat similar to the archery contest in the Odyssey, but it's not really all that similar once you read through it carefully and build the scene in your mind. Achilles brings out 20 axes now, 10 single-sided and 10 double-sided. You can imagine an axe like a modern hatchet as a single-sided axe, and more of like a battle axe as a double-sided. But he's not setting these up as targets like in the Odyssey. The axes are only the prizes, the 10 doubles for first place and the 10 singles for second place. So I imagine he's just placing them lying on the ground for now, just as a display and an enticement. This conflation of axes and archery is the limitation of the similarity between this contest and the scene in the Odyssey. For the target now, Achilles stands up a ship's mast in the sand. So imagine it's like a wooden pole being stood up, shoved into the sand and standing upright. And then he ties a pigeon to this mast with a cord. And this is the overly complicated part. If you hit the pigeon, you get first place. If you just hit the cord, you get second place. And this doesn't make much sense for a few reasons. For one, I'd think hitting the cord would be much harder than hitting the pigeon, especially since it's specifically called a fine cord and not a way thick and easily hit cord. The Lang, Leaf, and Myers translation has a footnote indicating that these last few contests are thought to be later additions for a number of reasons, but the reason I find most convincing is because the descriptions just aren't as rich. And I'll add that they don't seem to hold up to much scrutiny either. Anyway, let's plow ahead. It's still entertaining, and for a lot of these heroes, it will be our last time with them. So let's relish the moments, even if they are later and weaker additions. Who steps forward for the archery contest? Teucros, of course, is one. He's the archery guy. And the other is Meriones. They draw lots to see who will shoot first, and it's Teucros. This is his contest to win. Archery is his thing. He's really the only Greek hero known for his skill with the bow and arrow. Eager, since he believes he's got this wrapped up, Teucros quickly takes his shot. But he forgot the most important thing. He forgot to say a prayer to Apollo, the god of archery. Big mistake, and especially after seeing how important a prayer to the right god was for Odysseus in his big foot race victory. Teucros still manages to hit the cord, so he's secured second place. But I'm sure you're already realizing how poorly thought out this contest was, because yes, with the cord cut by the arrow, the pigeon now flies up into the sky, circling around above them. Not sure why Achilles set the contest up this way. Why not just a regular target with a bullseye and concentric circles to see who clearly got closest to the center? Anyway, quick thinking Meriones grabs the bow from Teucros, fits an arrow, and he remembers that prayer to Apollo before he shoots. Meriones' arrow flies straight up towards the bird, passes clean through it. Then the arrow comes back down, fixing itself in the ground right in front of Meriones' foot. Yikes! That was close. The pigeon, of course, falls and lands right back down onto that ship's mast where it started from. It dies, I imagine, with a squawk and flops onto the ground. Wow! Everyone is stunned. A clear victory for Meriones, who takes off with the double axes. Teucros is left with the single axes. The last contest. Here we are at the end of book 23. Achilles wants it to be a javelin throwing contest. The first prize is a cauldron. The second prize is a javelin. Agamemnon steps up, and so does Meriones. But before they even proceed to the actual contest, Achilles says to Agamemnon, "Son of Atreus, for that we know how far thou excellest all, and how far first thou art in the might of thy throw, take thou this prize with thee to the hollow ships, and to the hero Meriones let us give the spear, if thou art willing in thy heart. Thus, I at least advise. Based on Agamemnon's reputation with the javelin, Achilles leaves it to Agamemnon's judgment whether he even wants to proceed with the contest at all, or to simply accept the prize. Meriones, I suppose, could speak up at this point. It would have been acceptable for him to assert himself and his capability to win over Agamemnon. Antilochus did that earlier, but Meriones doesn't speak up. And this is the awkward and sudden end to the book. Agamemnon must have accepted the contestless win, since the final lines of the book are Meriones being given the second prize, and Agamemnon's herald Talthybios being handed the cauldron to haul back to Agamemnon's loot pile. I'm going to read into this ending a little bit here. I'm reading into it that Achilles is choosing to be gracious to the man he had previously had such a terrible feud with. It's Achilles no longer feeling so proud, no longer holding on to grudges that we're seeing here. Part of his personal growth, which will continue into book 24. The Iliad is often vague and leaves questions either unanswered or with multiple conflicting answers that you can read into whatever you're bringing into the Iliad with yourself and whatever you're ready to understand at the current point in your life. I've discovered new things each and every time I've read the Iliad. But some questions just don't have a single definitive answer. Were Achilles and Patroclus lovers? You can read a yes into this easily, or you could read a no into it. The author is intentionally vague on that point. Was it really Patroclus' spirit visiting Achilles, or was it just a dream manifesting Achilles' uneasy conscience? It's impossible to say. Does the Iliad glorify war? In the fine details, it sure does. Whole books of various heroes' Aristeia, carnage, and triumph. And yet, this book, book 23, leading into what we'll see in the upcoming final book, they certainly make war feel unglorious, pointless, hollow beside the joy and camaraderie we've experienced in these games. War is what destroyed the life that's being celebrated in book 23 and the future that Achilles wishes he could have had with Patroclus when he said to Patroclus back in book 16, "For would Father Zeus and Athene and Apollo would that not one of all the Trojans might escape death, nor one of the Argives, but that we twain might avoid destruction, that alone we might undo the sacred coronal of Troy." The Iliad has these messages buried throughout, these contradictory messages. It's frustratingly vague and doesn't just come out and say anything clearly. It could say, Achilles and Patroclus were lovers. This is a story about their love and why war, a bad thing, cost them their happiness and future together. But if the Iliad had been this blunt with its messages, would it have survived the millennia? Would it have found its way under Alexander the Great's pillow, his constant literary companion and inspiration? Would it have survived the centuries of religious censorship since the end of antiquity? Would it even be art if it had said what it had to say in an artless and blunt way? Would people who disagreed with its message have listened and had their hearts changed? Would those who agreed with its message have caught wind of any other viewpoints, or would they have just smugly glossed over it, content to believe their worldview had been confirmed? If the Iliad had just spelled out its message, it would have inspired no conversation. To become art, it had to leave room for interpretation. It had to allow us readers and listeners to think our own thoughts about it and find our own lessons about humanity in it. And that is what we've been doing for all of the long centuries since Homer, whoever he or they were, first composed this epic. We've been seeing ourselves in it, aspects of ourselves reflected, a glimpse at a time, a generation at a time. With any true piece of art, there is a Frankenstein's monster moment where The craft has been done as well as it could be. The component parts have been assembled, sewed together, poetry, metaphors, characters, a story arc. But then suddenly, like a stroke of lightning, all these lifeless parts are brought to life. And once that spark hits, it's no longer just an assembly of words, of parts. It's alive now. It becomes a thing in and of itself, not a creation, but a being in its own right. The Iliad is a piece of art. It is a living being. We have been wrangling with it, talking with it, communing with it, peering into its soul. I have been doing all these things for years now. You've taken this last journey through the Iliad with me, a journey that countless people have done since the dawn of history. We are so close to the end, but the Iliad will always be there, still breathing, still alive. And I know the Iliad will always be there to teach me something new the next time I pick it up. Whether it's my tattered 1918 pocket edition of the Lang, Leaf, and Myers, or any of the numerous translations I have on my Kindle app. So here we are now together at the very brink, about to begin the final book. It will be another tonal shift. The funeral is over. Achilles is left adrift, purposeless in life, but still alive. Why? Rage is over. Grief is cooling, but what is left? Set aside some quiet time to read book 24. It is a silent, stately meditation that we are only now ready for. We will discuss it next time. Until then, this has been Daniel with Your Mythology Book Club. Thank you so much for listening.